Oh, poop. Wait. Oh no, not again! Hey guys, it's Daniel here. And my god, after 2 months, I've finally returned with a brand new movie review. I'm sorry it's taken me this long. I guess The Walking Dead has taken over my opportunity to do these, but after all that time, I have finally returned with a movie review. And since The Walking Dead Season 11 has wrapped up so far, I can finally talk about some movies that I've not seen this year, but have seen this year. Well, review movies that I have seen this year, and also some movies that I haven't seen this year, but I didn't get a chance to review them. So, here is my new movie review, and to commemorate 3 years on YouTube, and 3 years since my review of the first movie came out, although I'm not really sure if this is the exact day, probably not, I am here today to give you guys my review of John Krasinski's famous sequel to his first directorial debut horror film, A Quiet Place Part 2. So, in A Quiet Place Part 2, it takes place after the events of A Quiet Place, duh, and the family from the first film are still trying to deal with this silent apocalyptic world because they're still trying to survive against the monsters. You get the whole gist. If the monsters hear a loud sound, they come and kill the person who made that sound. And this is spoilers for the first movie, so if you haven't seen the first movie yet, then don't watch the video because it does have spoilers for the first movie. I'm not going to spoil what happens in this movie, of course, but I do have to give some spoilers about what happened in the first movie in order to talk about this one. So, if you remember, by the end of the first movie, the father of the family, Lee, played by John Krasinski himself, died. It was pretty tragic, and they're still dealing with that loss. But they also discovered a weakness. They could connect the daughter, Reagan's hearing aid, to this radio, which causes a brainwave sound in the monster's head, which weakens its target, which gives you an opportunity to get out your gun and blow those suckers in the head. So with this weakness in mind, the family go out of their house and into the bigger world to see if they can find help, try to survive. They meet Emmett, a man who was friends with Lee, and they all try to survive together, as well as discovering that things are not what they seem beyond their own home. Now, this sequel has been the most anticipated sequel this year, I believe, unless there was another sequel. But it was one of my most anticipated sequels because it was the sequel to the fantabulous John Krasinski horror film, A Quiet Place. As I said in my review, it was haunting, it was scary, it was fun, the actors were excellent, the tension just keeps you creeped out because, again, this is a quiet place. If you make a loud sound, bang, the monsters will come out. And that third act, wow, that's when everything was coming to a close in that movie. And the ending definitely suggested that there was going to be a sequel, so I was so excited to see where the story was going to end up next. And with John Krasinski, the star and director of the first movie, returning back to direct the sequel and possibly write it, I think he writes it, it adds to the chemistry. Now, I've not really seen John Krasinski, I haven't seen The Office, so I don't know how good of an actor John Krasinski is, but he was fantastic in the first movie as Lee, but he's also extremely awesome as a horror director. So I couldn't wait to see the sequel, and the trailers just kept me going, but unfortunately the COVID hit, and the movie was just like pushed back over a year. It was way too long, so it was 3 years since the first movie. So I was just like, oh my goodness, when are we going to get this sequel? And now we finally have the sequel. And after watching the sequel, what do I think of it? Well done once again, John Krasinski. Well done. Because I am extremely impressed by the sequel. I love it. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen all year. And it's just as good as the first film. they're both equally as good. I can't really decide which one I like more, so I'm just going to pick them both. But I will say that, although I'm not sure if the sequel is better than the first movie, it definitely has more at stake in the second movie, because that's when we get to the first thing that I absolutely love about this film. The story. It adds a bigger, more diverse story than in the first movie. Not to say the first movie had a bad story, but the sequel just extends it. Because again, after what happened in the first movie, the family leave their home to go out into the world, so there's going to be more threats and more dilemmas that these families are going to have to be facing. It either helps or doesn't help that throughout most of the movie, some of the characters are disbanded, they are in different places doing their own things that I will not spoil, because the trailers didn't give away a lot about what the movie was going to be about, but the characters are in different places in different scenarios that gave them more development and more relationships with each other. And the visuals, wow. They are extraordinarily well. The aliens do look pretty cool. Although, I will admit that the CGI, I'm not sure if it's at the same level as the first movie. I think it might be a little toned down. So I think maybe the CGI in the first movie was a bit better than the one in the second movie. But the CGI was still fantastic. And horror movies also don't have to just be about scares. They can also be about character development, and that's when we get to the characters. The characters and the actors who portray them are still fantastic as they were in the first movie. Emily Blunt is still fantastic as the mother, Evelyn. Still sympathetic, she still adds a cunning, awesome stride whenever she has to fight some monsters, and she will do anything she can to protect her family. This is honestly the most dramatic and sympathetic role I've personally seen Emily Blunt in. Well, that depends on what I've seen her in, because there's not a lot. I loved her in Looper. She had an excellent performance there. But this movie and the first movie, wow, she's just taken her career to a whole new level. Marcus, the little boy, is still fantastic. I think it's Noah Jupe who plays the character. And fun fact, he was the boy who played the friend of Augie in Wonder, which is really cool. He's still fantastic as well, although I remember he's the weakest one, because that's probably because he didn't get the most focus. But honestly, I can understand that, because what happens to him in this film, oh boy, that was creepy as hell. That was intense and painful to watch, so I can understand why he wasn't a lot in the movie. And again, I will not spoil, but the two best performances in the entire film, one standing out from the other, was first off the girl who played the daughter, Reagan. Wow! She is fantastic. She doesn't even have to say anything. And that's really much the old point, because the actress and the character are deaf, just like Connie in The Walking Dead. So they can't say anything. I'm not like criticizing anything, although I do have to be disappointed with my past self, because here's a little clip from my old review.
But the daughter doesn't have one loud speaking line in this entire movie. Not one.
What the hell, young Daniel? She was deaf, you idiot. Did you not do any research? Wow. You are a very bad young reviewer, and you're never going to break 150 subscribers. Yeah, if you can't tell, I had a little bit of a screw up with back then. To be honest, it was my second movie review, so I didn't do a lot of research, but I do apologise for that little mistake I made back then. But now that I understand the actress a bit more, I can now appreciate her acting even more, because she just makes facial expressions, and she adds to the emotion and her determination. She has probably the best character arc in the entire movie. In fact, out of the two standouts, she is the real standout. She's my favourite character in this franchise so far, and in my opinion, she's the real main character, and I cannot wait to see what her development goes to in part 3, a possible part 3. And that's all I'm going to say about her character, because I don't want to spoil anything. But she's like the 11 Millie Bobby Brown of A Quiet Place. She was fantastic. And the second standout character and performance in the film is Emmett, a new character played by Cillian Murphy. I've only seen Batman Begins, and I've not seen Peaky Blinders or 12 Days. I forgot what that film was called. So I liked his performance in Batman Begins, but I don't have a huge fangasm of a actor that Cillian Murphy is. But my goodness, I thought his performance was elevated in this film because he came off as sympathetic, he came off as trustworthy, mysterious, but also extremely awesome. Because since John Krasinski's character's gone, he has been put in place of him, and he is fantastic in the film. He adds a lot of emotion, he comes up with determination. He may not trust the family at first, but you can tell that he wants to help them because he had a past with them, so of course he would still want to help them, even though he has not had a lot of trust with them. And I ate up all the scenes that he shared with Reagan. These two came off as sympathetic, and they work very well together, almost like the Jim Hopper and Eleven effect of the film. And without any spoilers, their journey, their character arcs, and they bond with each other, learning more about each other, helping each other, with Emmett helping Reagan to survive in the wild, and Reagan making Emmett learn to be more expressive about his feelings and not be neglectful and all that. That's what I love about their characters, and again, can't wait to see how they end up in part 3. And of course, just like in the first movie, we have the monsters who were in the first movie, who are attracted to loud sounds and will kill anyone who makes that sound. They are back in this movie as well, of course, and if you thought they were good in part 1, they are awesome in this movie, dude. They are just more threatening in this movie than in part 1, because they do have more scenes in this movie than they did in part 1. And a lot of these scenes are still awesome and intense, especially when you don't see them at first and then they pop out at you. You're like, oh my god, this is so creepy. I don't know when those monsters are going to pop up, but oh my god! And that's another praise to give this movie as well as the first movie. It is really intense. I knew that it was going to be scary, but I didn't think it was going to be that scary. That's my thoughts for the first movie, and that's my thoughts for the second movie as well. So I had no idea that this was going to be that scary. But my god, there will be so many scenes that make your skin crawl because you're just waiting for the moment to happen. You're just creeping along with the characters in a room that the monsters are in, but they're hidden behind shelves and they're being very silent and all that, and you just don't know what's going to happen next and when those monsters are going to come out to scare you. And when they do, there are a couple of times where you'll just want to stand up in the theatre or stand up in front of the TV, be determined, and yet feel weakened when you let out a scream like that, which just adds to the whole experience of the movie because you're supposed to be creeped out. And again, it just comes off as very scary. This is how you do horror. Now, some people have complained that there were a few cheap jump scares, and there might be just one or two, but that's about it. There's no real jump scares in this movie because a lot of it is just dealing with the tension. But another thing that adds to the horror-ness of this film is the score. Once again, it is Hitchcockian. Again, with its use of string instruments or something, because they just kind of keep the music very smooth and all that, but also tipping to the peak. That string is just tightening and tightening, and just like the first movie, you don't know what's going to happen next and when that string is going to finally snap. And the multiple themes from the first movie are still in this movie. You know what I mean? You know the whole dun dun dun, and of course we have the most emotional theme in the movie, the whole dun 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 dun. Yeah, you all know what I'm talking about. These themes are still fantastic and they add to the whole emotional horror and characteristics of A Quiet Place. And once again, the climax of this film, wow. It is also adding much weight to the film, and it still ends on an open header for a possible third movie. It is spectacular, just like the first film. Now, I'm pretty sure that you all know that I absolutely love A Quiet Place Part 2. I mean, I made it quite clear, and I don't really have any major problems with this movie, but there are a few little nitpicks on a level. They don't really bother the movie, but it does work on a personal level. The first one is, like I said earlier, the CGI in the film could get a little bit too CG-ish. Like, in the first movie, yes, the CGI can get a bit too, like, unrealistic at parts, but at the same time, it still kind of looked pretty good. In fact, I think I possibly liked the CGI in the first film than I did in this film, just a teensy-weensy bit, because there were some scenes, like there's a scene where Reagan is fighting a monster and Emmett comes in to shoot the monster. The monster in the scene just looked a bit cartoony, so it didn't really look realistic. So that was my first like little nitpick. My second final nitpick that I had with the film, which doesn't really contribute a huge part of the film because it was still well handled, but it wasn't utilised to their full potential. But I get that's the point, and that is there's a threat that comes in halfway through the film, and this threat was well handled. It was creepy and it was unusual to see in this type of apocalypse. But after that scene, this threat did not play a contribution ever again. And I wish they could have like utilised it more. But again, that's pretty much the point, because I'm pretty sure that they're going to introduce a type of threat like this in the third movie. And speaking of the third movie, one problem I did have, and it's not a problem with the film at all. This film did come out like during a bit of the COVID. Yes, it was released in a few little cinemas, but the COVID did hit. Sure, it did manage to reach like over the money of it in the box office more than its original budget, but it wasn't like that at first. So if they don't make a Quiet Place Part 3 because of this, I will be really angry. And again, the ending does indicate that there's going to be a sequel, and my god, with how some this franchise has gone so far, they better flipping make it. And we can have a trilogy of horror films that we can enjoy and love, done by John Krasinski. But again, these are huge nitpicks and they don't attract the film. But besides the nitpicks, I love A Quiet Place Part 2. It's one of my favourite movies I've seen all year. It always put a smile on my face. I love the characters, I love the story, the scares were unhandling, the score was excellent, the ending left open-handled, and I'm still impressed by how John Krasinski